I'm going to struggle with the fact that our opening stories are a series of losses that we've had recently. Some great people who have touched, I can't even count how many lives, with their ability to play a role in this great tradition of these stories we love. I'm going to start off by talking about Phyllis Coats. She's the star of Adventures of Superman, TV's first Lois Lane. She passed away at 96 years old. It was reported by her daughter to The Hollywood Reporter. And she had 24 total episodes from 52 to 53. She was the first embodiment of Lois Lane. It's pretty amazing. Brad, I was just curious what your thoughts were when you heard the news or just talking about it now today.
Yeah, it's always sad, but 96 years is pretty amazing, and we should all be so lucky. So she had a full life. Sorry as always to see her go. I don't think she gets enough credit, because I think that this version of Superman and Lois Lane were the introduction for a lot of people to the character of Lois Lane and Superman. And you don't really hear her name get thrown around so much like you do like Margot Kidder. So, hopefully she can get the respect that she deserves, going forward.
Certainly. I mean, I think that's always one of the things that's a challenge. You have pioneers and trailblazers, and then there are others who follow the path, who can do more, as it points out in the article that was picked up by Comic Book that we're referencing. It mentions she had an opportunity to sign on for a second season, had an opportunity to do another project, but in that first season, 24 episodes, she was able to do some amazing work. And then who can follow after Margot Kidder? We have other examples of those who could say, oh, let me give you my take on Lois Lane. But sometimes the trailblazers don't get noticed as much when there's a newer version, a newer take. But as you pointed out, some recognition deserved for those who take the first chance, to say, okay, let me give you a first shot at what I think this character in 2D looks like in a major project like this. Someone who brought 2D characters to life for me in a way that changed everything I thought I understood about comics was writer and artist Keith Giffen. This is someone who changed for me some really fun things where I thought to myself, this is comics? This is great. I mean, anyone who brings to life a character like Ambush Bug is immediately going to, have some great things for me. But you're not here to just listen to me, Brad. I was curious what your thoughts are, just reflecting on yet another great passing.
He was one of my favorite writers, especially DC writers back in the that post-crisis sweet spot where you had Man of Steel and George Perez's Wonder Woman, but you also had things like Justice League International, which was probably still is one of my all-time favorite superhero comics. And that was all him. The humor, the way that he could weave in different characters was kind of groundbreaking. I don't think we'd have a Joss Whedon if we didn't have a Keith Giffen and Justice League International. No one could do it better. And I'm glad you brought up Ambush Bug, because Ambush Bug was always such an underappreciated character. I was so glad when they brought him back in Suicide Squad a few years ago. I mean, those two alone, he would be right up there in my upper tier comics writer. So losing him was a huge loss, and it kind of came out of nowhere. It was kind of a shock to me. I just wasn't expecting that. So, but yeah, I mean, what a loss. He's one of those writers that I almost feel such a connection to that it's almost like losing a family member. Probably one of the biggest losses since Kevin Conroy for me when it comes to the comic world, and George Perez as well. And we've had so many losses, it seems like, this year. So it's just a shame. He was just absolutely one of my faves, and I'm gonna miss him terribly. I want to go and reread Ambush Bug and Justice League International now. What about you?
It does make me want to go back and read those comics. Justice League International changed what I thought I understood about superheroes. It was such an irreverent take. This is the guy who, if Steve was here, I'm sure he would be shouting it out. One punch, right? Yep. One punch.
Yeah. Oh, suddenly
you have this legendary moment between Batman and Guy Gardner. We had the Bwahaha. We had, the blue and gold, and a wonderful love of the irreverence. I also I know it doesn't get mentioned as much, but I felt he played a really pivotal role in the 52 series, which for me, I ended up collecting the volumes. And Ambush Bug again gets to make an appearance in some wonderful ways in there. But I think he really caught me for a moment when he actually clued me into this idea while reading the Breakdown series for Justice League and Justice League Europe, where he has one of the characters going, yeah, it's pretty amazing with all the stuff going on. It's like there's some writer who just had a terrible dream and decided to throw us all in it. No, for all the stuff we've got going on, it'd take a whole team of writers to make them. He was, he was doing this. He was poking, even in the midst of all these terrible things going on. Max Lord gets shot, and there's all these things happening where it's breaking down, literally, as the series describes. And he brought it to life in such wondrous ways. I felt his hand on certain things. Like, anytime there was a comedic reference, I pretty much was certain it was him. Whether it was Invasion or any other project where I'll go through and I'll go, huh, that sounds like Giffen, right? Like
Invasion was another one that I really enjoyed, I think, more than most people seem to. I don't know how much of a impact it had or how much people liked it. It seemed to kind of get a lot of shade thrown at it, but that was a fun series for me too. I'm glad you brought that one up.
Pleasure. Yeah, it was actually something because I was brought into the Flash comics and had started tracking back and found a couple. There were some issues that referenced a major plot line for Wally West and the idea of his dad being like an agent and dying maybe tragically when they released the I think it was the anti-meta bomb, and there was this attack on metas. And anywho, it sort of like opened my eyes to like, oh, I missed this. I was just at the end, like whatever happened before I should find out about. Later going back and tracking down a lovely collected edition that I could read through and just have a lot of fun. And yes, his fingerprints of humor. I mean, we can also talk about his work for Marvelous Competitors, creating someone like Rocky Raccoon. I mean, anybody who can walk on both sides of the aisle and be like, yeah, look, I can create legendary characters. I can come back to DC and do Lobo. This is someone who was instrumental in shaping not only characters, but storylines and narratives. I mean, even recently, doing some really amazing stuff. And as you point out, this one hurts the most because I remember I was just getting into comics when I started reading JLI and things like that. And it sunk in. It made those episodes, those issues feel just they ingrained in me in some way. I wish I could describe better, but I really felt it.
I really think, it's funny that you should say that you started reading DC with him, because he was one of the ones that got me reading DC. Because I had started out, I just started out with Marvel. I don't know exactly how that happened. It just kind of happened that way because I started with G.I. Joe. That was Marvel. So I just, so it took me a little bit longer to discover DC. And Keith Giffen was one of the reasons why I was like, oh, yeah, I'm a fan of this as well. And that was, a lot of that was because of Justice League International.
And for me, it was also such a fun little comparison because I got into DC because of The Flash. A friend got me the comic, my first Flash comic, as a birthday present. And then I saw The Flash was in JLI, and I'm like, hey, wait a minute. He pops in there a little bit? Like, hold on. And he's kind of goofy and a bit, not always the brightest bulb. Okay, let's see what's... It was such a twist because I'm reading the serious version of him in one comic and this hilarious sort of workplace comedy with him in another one. And we have him to thank for that. We have him to make us go, yeah, when do we get to see that version of the Justice League one day make it to the screen? And a recognition for all the fans who laughed and loved it as much as we did. I would like to say that's the only story we have about those passing, but we had two more. Really amazing. I mean, it's like I hear names and suddenly I start trying to imagine the catalog of when I've seen, glimpses of them in title pages. Because another one that I didn't really see coming, and I'm glad you pointed that out with Keith Giffen. With Perez, we had a little bit of an announcement. There was a bit of time for fans to process. But with Keith Giffen and now also Steve Erwin passing away at 63. Deathstroke, the Terminator artist, co-creator of Checkmate, which is just such a fun concept to enjoy in the different iterations we've had it. I mean, recently it was a player and things that had happened around the New 52 and other events, and more recently, I mean, it's amazing to think about these people who have come along and just put their imprint on comics. What were your thoughts in the regards to the news and Steve passing?
Yeah, it brought to mind the early Checkmate. Like I remember, and that was probably I could be wrong, but I think it was in the late 80s, or no, might have been mid 80s. I remember a Checkmate series, I believe, that was really good. It was a lot different than the Checkmate that we've gotten, since Infinite Crisis. It's a little bit was different than that. Now I want to go try to find those books. But this was really unexpected as well. I mean, that came as kind of a shock. And he always was one of those artists that I respected, but didn't really dive into so much. And now I feel like I really have to. Like I want to go back. Like I said, I want to go back and rediscover that Checkmate series. And Deathstroke is such an important character as is. So I'd like to go back and rediscover his work on that as well. Another, it's a shame we're just losing too many comics legends this year. It's been rough.
It has, and I think other than our first story where you said, hey, at 96, it's hard to get mad at not considering that being a full life, but 63 feels short. 63 feels like we could have gotten maybe another 10 or 20 years of amazing projects from someone who was still creating. And I think that's the one thing. If someone still wants to pick up the pen, sit down at the table, whatever their art is, and keep creating, it's like, man, I don't want them to stop. I feel like, that desire to get back up at the table every day should be a reason to get another day. And that's just a silly little take for me. But you're right, just talking about Steve Erwin, it's an interesting thing to think about. Not one, I mean, Deathstroke, such an iconic image, right? Such a really fun character. But Checkmate was such an interesting idea. I came across some collected books through one of the lines that's been doing different sales. And it's like, oh, hey, this is a great way to get my hands on something like that. It's already all collected. I don't have to hunt for missing issues, and I can just enjoy a great story. And reading through that and understanding this whole process, you've got the black and white, you've got this whole chess mentality. There's these very strict structures, but it's all introduced in a very methodical way so that you only know as much as they need you to know when they need you to know. And that feels like the tone of the entire project. And it's a great feeling to create. And when you do it successfully, I mean, I can't imagine what it's like to put those pages together and go, hey, that is, but like you said, for anyone who wants to know what that's like, go pick up the book. You can find the collections out there and share with us your favorite stories that you discovered afterwards, because you might find us reminiscing at some point down the line, like, hey, I finally did get a chance to check that out. And let me tell you what I find, because I love with comics, there's always threads from the past to the present. There's constantly someone pulling up some great thing about it. And one more reminder of how the past is constantly, reflecting the present. If you were to turn on Batman the Animated Series today and watch an episode featuring Two-Face, you would have had the opportunity to hear the great vocal talents of Richard Moll, who has died, has passed away. A 6'8" actor, famous for his wonderful role as Bull Shannon on Night Court, which is always one of those things that has to be pointed out to me. I loved Bull. I thought he was just so much fun and such a great character. And whenever I hear his name and Two-Face, I always want to picture him with the headphones in front of the mic, making expressions and just being this wonderfully animated guy. I'm just curious what your thoughts were on this final story for Obituary.
He would probably want to slap me upside the head because I did not realize that he was the voice of Two-Face until now, which kind of goes to show how impressive the Batman animated series is, because they had such incredible, crazy voice talent that somebody who I should know was the voice. I don't, but yeah, I always associated him with Bull so much. I have memories of watching Night Court as a kid, and there'd be lots of times when my parents would make me go out of the room because there was something I can't remember what it was. It makes me want to go back and rewatch the show, but yeah, he was always my favorite in Night Court. He just had a very kind of jovial essence about him, like the gentle giant type of personality. And that, yeah, so it's, again, here we go. We have another incredible loss. And judging by my news feeds on social media, he affected a lot of people. It really seemed to hit people hard. A lot of people were posting about him and about Night Court. So yeah, it's another sad loss.
It is, and I love the nostalgia that you remind me of when it comes to that show. It's a show that I didn't get to watch in its prime time. Again, same reasons as you. Certain things my parents were very clear we weren't watching. And then there was also just timing. I remember when it was still on regularly, I was getting jobs in high school, and it's like, hey, do you watch this show? No, I work that night, and there is no DVR, and I don't, there's a limited space on the VCR scheduling for all of that fun technology thing that we had to, compensate or work around. But he was so animated, and I love that when they would start doing syndication, I could catch it at nights when I was working at a night job. And my grandmother, as she was passing and getting older, and you could see she had a throat tumor that was starting to really affect her. We could talk about the show because it was a show she loved. Mm-hmm. She loved Harry, and she also loved Mel Torme, who was a regular guest on there. But because of that, we could connect over characters like Bull, who was, as you pointed out, had like this like childlike enthusiasm and joy, so animated with the expressions. The guy, he could look angry and sad and happy. he brought that like childlike honesty, I think. His vocal talents later on doing stuff, as the story mentions, from Freakazoid to Superman, Justice League, Batman, amazing work. I think you were right to say that he was part of those memories that go with a show like Night Court that affected so many people. I think it's, tantamount to without the same notoriety as someone like Betty White or a character who is just so recognizable and iconic for those moments that they created for us.